Okay.
Started the recording.
Okay. Yeah. No, I just tried the recording button, but I couldn't make it work.
Mm.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today is the May 6th meeting of the Finance Committee, and it begins our cycle of reviewing sections of the budget that have been submitted to us. And my first order of business is calling the meeting to order and making sure the members can hear and we can hear them. So I'm just going to call out the names as I see them on the screen. Bob,
Present.
Mandy,
Present.
Bernie,
We didn't know I
Bernie.
said Mandy or Andy, so you
Okay.
can take both of us.
Okay. So I got both of you. So Bernie,
I'm here.
Thomas, Tom.
Here.
And we're waiting for Alicia. And I see that Paul has joined us. So we have public comments listed as the first item on our agenda. So I am going to open it for public comments right now. And I see that there's one hand up right now. So Melissa, if you can bring her in, I could do it too if you make me co-host, but I can't.
I have made you
Okay.
co-host.
Okay.
Right.
I'll make her.
So
Kathleen, we brought you in, so you should be able to talk.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, maybe speak just a little bit louder, but yes.
Sure. My comment is about the capital improvement plan and just the way in which capital money is being allocated in general. In looking pretty closely at the budgets over the last now 11 years and the capital improvement plans, what I have noticed is that there are a lot of municipal departments that have not increased their operating expenses at all since 2015. And many of these same municipal departments are the departments that are getting increasing amounts of the capital improvement plan every year, often for bundled type expenses that might otherwise not meet the threshold for capital, and also in a recurring way. And while I do understand there may be instances in which there would be funding limitations that would cause operating expenses to be held at a level services, I think it's probably unreasonable to expect that facilities maintenance and equipment maintenance have barely budged in 11 years. And it really just seems as if a lot of costs are instead being externalized to the capital improvement plan. And I just think it's doubtful that the municipal side of the budget could stay within a 4% increase if it weren't for this additional money every year. And I think that budgeting in this way is perpetuating a false narrative that the schools are the only entities that can't stay within their means. And I think that if they also were able to supplement their operating budgets with capital in the way that the municipal side of the budget is doing, it would be a different story. I also just want to add that there's almost zero transparency, as far as I can tell, into how the capital money is actually spent once allocated. I don't know where one would find how the money is being spent, but for example, $250,000 a year going to sustainability projects when sustainability department doesn't even exist in open checkbook makes it very difficult to track down how any of this money is being spent. So I just would urge the finance committee and the council to think about more transparency and in how this information is presented and discussed for the public, because I think the way it's being done right now is really perpetuating a false narrative that's very damaging to the schools. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I'm just looking to see. I believe that is the only hand up asking to talk. So we are turning to, Alicia has joined us. So Sharon, you're first. Alicia Walker has library as the section of the report she's going to be writing up. So she also sent some questions. I realize they came into you late. late afternoon yesterday, and I think you received at least one other set. So perhaps we can focus on you can say a little bit about your budget, and then we can focus on some of the questions, if that works for you.
Sure. Yeah, however you want to. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey,
Can-
Kat, point of order, can you just check and see if if Alicia can hear us and we can hear?
Oh, thank you very much. Alicia, can you hear us and can we hear you?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thanks. Thank you, Bob. Just seeing her name doesn't necessarily mean that. Thank you very much. So Sharon, why don't you just say a few words, and if you have some responses, I know at least a couple of the questions was you've said you've been living with 3 unfilled positions and you're keeping them unfilled. And there was a question about looking forward when you have an expanded facility, and then one on the current state of the endowment. So I'm not sure where else we want to focus, but at least those are 2, with you've got a move coming, and then a couple of years from now, you're going to have a much bigger square footage in terms of how are you going to manage the operating budget.
So I have a quick spiel, and then I have answers to the question. Like you said, I didn't do the answers to the question. There's a lot of questions, and I didn't get to them till this morning. But let me share my screen.
Okay.
And let's start from beginning. Awesome. Okay. Again, thank you so much for having me, you guys. So really quickly, the library trustees have submitted a request for a 4% increase to the town appropriation for FY26. The proposed total operating budget is $3,088,672, which is a 3.2% increase over the library's adjusted FY25 budget. The trustees approved a 4% draw rate from the endowment, and we've budgeted just over $146,000 to come from the Friends and community donations. Regarding our expenses, we have budgeted for a 12.9% increase to benefits, a 2% increase to the book purchases. All of our state aid award, 100% of our state aid award will be used. Most of it, 97% of it will go towards staff salaries, and 3% of it will be paid to the town in the form of rent for library services at the 2 branches. We do expect that the Jones will be providing services out of 101 University Drive for the entirety of FY26, and the 3 full-time positions will remain unfilled. And I do want to speak to that just a little bit. And there were more questions from the counselors about this afterwards. I wanted to say the library is struggling just like everybody else. And we've been struggling for at least the 14 years that I've been here. And the library, because the library has historically taken a 6% draw on the endowment during previous trustee administrations to fund just annual operating expenses, I think it's safe to say the library has been struggling for decades. The town's appropriation to the library has never covered the full cost of library staff, just the staff. We've always needed to use our annual state aid award to fill the gap. But usually even that isn't enough money to cover our needs. So for example, back in 2019 and 2020, that's when 3 of our longtime full-time employees retired. Yay for them. But we have yet to be able to fill those 3 positions. And that's really hard on us because the library, just like the town and the schools, none of us can do what we do without staff. The library system is open 7 days a week. We have several public service desks at 3 different library buildings, overseeing programming at all 3 buildings, plus off-site to all these different age groups, kids, teens, seniors, archival researchers, all while at the same time, staff need to be able to get sick and go on vacation. And so, being this busy, well-used and loved library, it takes a lot of staff. So in order to meet demand and maintain staff sanity, we really need to fill these 3 positions, especially once the library opens. But every year, just like with all the other legs of town government, we're all getting further and further away from an adequate baseline. In closing, I want to assure you we're not going to stop, we're not whining. We are truly grateful for every bit of support that we get from the town. And we absolutely understand the importance of all the legs of town government. It's just, we needed to remind people what it takes to run the library. Now, I have other slides, but I kind of I went through it really quickly. And so I thought, and I'm happy to go back to this later. Whoops, go back. These are the questions in black are the questions I got from counselors, and in green were my quick off the cuff answers that I put together this morning. And so those are the endowment numbers. 4% draw rate has been going on for multiple years now. The town appropriation, is it sufficient? Yes. I thought this was a fascinating question. Is there a long-term strategy to diversify revenue and reduce reliance on the municipal appropriation? So on the one hand, no, we're always going to be a town department. We are always going to need the municipal appropriation. But on the flip side, we have also always, Melissa, you're raising your hand. Do you want me to stop talking?
No, I was just going to make sure you told them that there's a requirement for the Mars contribution based on the formula.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, we do. There is a municipal appropriation requirement through the state in order to be eligible to get a state aid award. And it's the average of the 3 previous municipal appropriations times increased by 2.5%. And so since I've been here, we've always met the municipal appropriation requirement. Thank you, Melissa. So that being said, as I was saying in my spiel, we need the town for capital and personnel, because the endowment draw, taking a 4% endowment draw doesn't cover those expenses. But as far as programming and paying utilities and stuff, that's what the endowment is for, and programming, that's what the Friends are for. So we've always done that, and we'll keep doing that, and that's completely reasonable. You all asked about the grant, which I really appreciate, asking about the ESL grant. So for FY26, we were expecting an additional $15,000, but that grant, as we've notified everybody, it ended in February or March of this year. But what Lynn is doing instead is she's continuing this program, but she's fitting it within her 20 hours a week. So she has set other things aside so that she can complete this class, which is so great. The Friends of the Library, ever since the Friends took over our fundraising tasks, we've gone from raising, $20,000 a year because we sent out one letter a year, to now we're raising upwards of $150,000 a year, plus the capital campaign. So we've been really lucky to have those folks doing what they do. And so here I've listed off how for FY26, we've got $146,000 coming from the Friends, and this is the breakdown. About half of it is for circulating materials, and then there's programming for all the different age groups. The personnel costs, that's what you had asked about, which I thank you. I appreciate you all asking. What is driving the 83%, what's driving personnel? Really the benefits increase. And, that's true for all the town departments in the schools. That 12.9% increases, that's painful. The 3 full-time positions that are unfilled are a building maintenance person, and a person dedicated to special collections, and a person dedicated to the teen space. So right now, what we do with special collections, you know, in all cases, we rely on part-timers. And for special collections, our special collections department is not open the full amount of hours that our library is open. And then regarding the new teen space, I don't envision us opening special collections fewer number of hours. And same thing with the teen space. I feel like the only solution to that, if we can't have the full timers, is to have additional part timers, because those are really important aspects of what the library does. You had asked how much more we would need to fund those positions, and we're looking at about $123,000 plus benefits, and I'm not sure how to, you know, is that an additional 20%? 30% for benefits? I'm not sure how to do that, but that gives you an idea. And have any staffing models or operational efficiencies? So yes, that's what we've been doing ever since we haven't been able to, you know, fill those positions. We've been kind of merging departments. Our branches, for example, we've got more, we've got staff serving at both of the branches and at the Jones, you know, youth and teen programming. So like we're less siloed now, I guess is what I want to say. Yeah, and then over to benefits. Healthcare costs have been increasing. What measures? Yeah, it's kind of the same to my answer to 5C. No, I actually think I meant 5D there. You know, what we've been doing to mitigate. And then the difference, how does the cost of benefits in FY26 compared to FY25? Yeah, so if we went from 354,000 up to 478,000, that's enormous. What is this? Oh, the materials budget. Okay. So this is the materials expenditure requirement, which is different from the municipal appropriation requirement. So there's the calculation. The calculation is we have to spend $249,000 and some change next year. And so we've budgeted for 250. Since none of this, how stable are the other funding sources? Notice my little smiling emoji. Is anything stable right now? And, you know, I kid, but that's true for any year, you know, so yes, it's stable. Yeah. And spending on electronic formats. This was kind of a fun question that you all had asked. Absolutely, this town loves physical books. But also there are a lot of different types of information, whether it's recreational or educational, sources that are moving online. And, you know, that's very often how they're streaming their videos and they're listening to their books through Libby. So the circulation is still happening. They're just not necessarily checking out a physical book. They're checking out items that are digital. And we're trying to, why this question, one of the reasons it is important is because our materials expenditure has increased up to $250,000. But that being said, because there are so many different formats of books that we have to purchase, our materials expenditure, our materials budget doesn't go as far as it once did, because not only do you have to buy that Stephen King book as regular print, you have to buy it in large print, and you have to buy it in an actual audio, and you have to stream it, you know, through Libby. So it's, yeah, as opposed to if you only had to buy a book, then you could, anyways. Let me keep going. Okay, so these were questions on circulation and attendance. So up here, so everything's on the increase. And these were just a couple of the graphs that we had put together. Our programming is really skyrocketing. People love what the staff are doing program wise for all the different ages. Our attendance is coming back from COVID. That's what that That's what that drop there is. And then down on the bottom is, these are snapshots of different formats. So circulation of books starting on the uptick, and the 3 different colors are ages, adults, teens, and kids. So circulation of audios, that's starting on the uptick as well. Videos, that's starting to come back again. But where you see, so it's not that the circulation isn't happening, it's just people are getting their information through digital formats, and that's where that green graph is kind of going sky high. What other questions? Performance metrics. That was interesting. So, absolutely, just like in any profession, you're using your expertise and you're constantly thinking, okay, I just held this program and this many people came, so we definitely want to do that again. And we did this program and not so many people came, so maybe we don't want to do that program. But one of the things, it's important to keep in mind that it's not all cut and dry. Just because we don't have 150 people coming to blah, it doesn't mean it's not an important program. And one of the things that I highlight is our teen librarian this fall, it was either February or March, put together a name and gender marker change workshop. We had a notary on hand so that people who needed to seek gender affirming changes to their state or federal documentation, they were able to do that during this program. Now, I don't know exactly how many people attended this. It was well received, well attended, but we didn't have 150 people the way we do when we have a magician. But that being said, it was a really important program. And building project questions. I didn't spend a heck of a lot of time on these because we're going to close to the public next Wednesday, and everything is moving at the speed of light. So all services will continue. Programming will take place off-site. We're going to be located at 101 University Drive. Stay tuned for all answers having to do with the move. Any costs having to do with the temporary location or delays, or all of those costs are in the building project budget as opposed to the library's operating budget. And then questions about the actual building improvements, utilities, improve staff sightlines, to maintain level staffing. Those were the things that I kind of picked out really quickly. So that was my best crack at those questions this morning, but I'm happy to answer more questions.
So why don't we stop sharing, and Sharon, if you can send that chart pack, we'll post it. And I was following through the list of questions, the printed ones, and you did, I think, a remarkable job.
Thank you. Thank you.
on a short turnaround on not just answering them, but giving us answers in writing. So I'm going to open it up first to Alicia and then Mandy. Alicia.
Thank you, Kathy, although you just covered everything I was going to say. So I was just going to say thank you, Sharon, so much, because that was incredibly comprehensive. And I mean, you did really answer all of my questions in a very short time period. So I appreciate that. And then I was also just going to ask if I could have access to that presentation. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mandy.
So as you were talking about the minimum materials budget that you have to have every year, which is based on the town's appropriation. I don't have all the numbers in front of me, so this is why this question's kind of like wandering here.
Yeah.
So that goes up a certain percentage every year. And it was my understanding that a lot of those materials are purchased out of the endowment part of your budget, not the town appropriation part of the budget.
Right.
And the endowment part might not increase proportionately to what the town's contribution is. So how does those two work together? And at some point, is that going to be a problem in terms of like meeting the minimum requirement within, given that those numbers might not be increasing at the same sort of rate of change.
Yeah, no, great
with
question. The
wildly different
source,
sizes.
yeah, no, the source of funding, the MBLC doesn't care about. So if whether we got all of our funding from the town or all of the funding from the endowment, as long as we're spending that money on circulating materials, that's all that matters. They don't care where we get the money from.
But I guess my question is, if you know, you're up to 250, but the endowment draw isn't that big right now. I don't think.
It just didn't go up, Mandy. The endowment draw. They held it constant. The slides that.
Right. And this is why my question is not well worded, because I don't have numbers in front of me, but that the town's dollar amount of increase, and it's a 4% increase every year, and you have to spend 13% of that on materials every year, or whatever our number is, right? But that's a larger increase in terms of raw dollar amounts than potentially a 4% draw increases over the course of on the endowment side. And I guess I'm wondering, does that yearly increase in required materials spending become problematic given what portion of the budget at this point is trying to cover that number, because the town's contribution is not covering even all of the personnel costs. So other portions of the budget that were normally covering the material costs are now having to first cover personnel, and there's less money. I'm not wording it well because I don't have numbers in front of me. But...
So the municipal appropriation, the town appropriation, only matters when we are calculating the materials expenditure requirement.
Yeah.
So if it would be a problem if, for example, if the municipal appropriation were level funded for 3 or more years in a row, then you're right. When you do the math, we wouldn't be meeting the municipal appropriation requirement, but that's different from the materials expenditure requirement, which uses the municipal appropriation requirement just to calculate what that number is. But then it doesn't matter what sources you use. And I feel like I need a dry erase board because
and I feel like
you
I
understand.
need to run numbers to ask my question the way I'm trying to ask it. So
we could get in trouble, but we never have since I have been here. The last time the library was in trouble was when everybody was in trouble in 2008 and 2009. And that's when the MBLC will give out waivers. You have to fill out, there are more forms you have to fill out, and you give a presentation to the MBLC gods, and they provide a waiver. And yeah, I'll just stop there. Okay. But if it'll help, once you have those numbers in front of you, and I'm happy to answer better.
Thank you. And I'll try to ask the question better.
Bob.
Yeah, I had just a couple of nits. One nit was on the first paragraph of the expenses, which is the last sentence of that is, as a result of the library staff or town employees, the town's appropriation no longer covers 100% of the library's personnel costs. It's been that way ever since I've been on the finance committee.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Maybe you should reword it that. I mean, it's fine for you to say it doesn't cover 100%, but no longer implies that it had, like last year, when in fact it hasn't for several years.
Will you do me a favor? Tell me where that is, because I agree with you.
First paragraph under expenses in your the thing your budget that you.
The one that was posted.
Yes,
Sharon.
yes, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
And then
that's a good nit. Yes.
And then the question I had, and I know that you're down 3 people, but will you need the same number of people at 101 University that you need now in the current library? And is there some way to repurpose some of those people for other tasks in town in the interim?
So one of the reasons I'm okay not filling those positions right now is because we're in this building and we're going to be going to 101. So no, I'm not looking to fill those positions right now. I got very nervous, when for the past 2+ years with the schools are really struggling. And so what I normally do and what the trustees normally do is we kind of, because we've got this building project going on, we've kind of taken a back seat so that the not enough resources can be spread around. And so I don't like to storm the castle. Like that's not it's not the way I can be a library director. It's not the way I can in good conscience come to the town council and say, hey, this is why we need the money. So I felt like I wanted to bring this to the top of the list, trying to find that happy medium between not whining, but still wanting to point out the fact that when we open the new library in a couple of years, we're really going to need those positions because special collections really is going to need another full-timer, and the teen space is definitely going to need another full-timer. And so when I heard about the possibility of us not getting that same 4% or 3% or 2% or whatever everybody else was going to get, I got worried. So this was me trying to let people know. Does any of that make sense? My point is I don't want those positions right now. I want them when the new building opens.
Understood. But
Okay.
the question I had was, given your current staffing, will you need all those people at 101 University, or can some of those people be repurposed in other parts of town? In other words, like what we did in COVID, where we repurposed some of the recreation staff to work elsewhere.
No, because we're still open 7 days a week. We still have to provide our full level of library services. I've still got to, staff the 2 branches. So no, we've got, the only thing we don't have at 101 is space for programs, but the programming will still happen. They'll just happen elsewhere, offsite.
Okay. And then I understand that the costs of 101 and all the movement and all that is all in the budget for the reconstruction and renovation. Will we get a report on the expenditures for that project? Because I want to see what where that expenditure is and how much is going to the town and etc.
Yeah, absolutely. When we started with Colliers a decade ago, they were on board and they were giving, detailed budgets. And then, they kind of took a back seat last summer, and Bob Parent has been doing God's work. And so, Colliers will be brought on, and absolutely very detailed budgets will be presented to everybody. Definitely.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bernie.
Hi, thank you. Sharon, thanks for all your good work in the work of your staff. I really appreciate it. And this is sort of a staffing question as well, because full disclosure, I live about a quarter mile from the Munson branch. And I enjoy very much just having to stroll down the street to pick up my books. But we do have a relatively small space here in town, and you have 2 branches and you have a staffing crunch. So the question is really, how sustainable do you see those 2 branch libraries being, given that you have an increased demand for staffing at the central location, and you want to be able to help schools and do some other work. So it's a question about viability for the North Amherst and the Munson branches.
Yeah, gosh, no, they're going to be there forever, hold harmless. What else can I say about they will be there forever and ever and ever? This town really values the branches. Even if you're a Jones user, It's a different experience at the branches, and so never in my time, and it's not that we haven't been afraid of losing money since, in the past 14 years. The type of budgeting that I would do, or when I have to do cuts, I tend to cut everything equally. And I can only speak for myself right now. It has not gotten to the point that it did in 08 and 09, where things were very, very drastic. But I have always felt like there isn't one department, and when I say department, I mean library department, that's more important than the others. We need the branches, we need special collections, we need ESL, we need kids, we need adult circ. And so if budgets are cut, in my mind, they should all get cut. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a flip side of Bernie's. While you're at 101, have you thought about increasing the hours at the branches so that people would be diverted to one of those two places?
Yeah, maybe. So we're not going to right away because we need to know how many staff, this is kind of happening like that. We need to know how many staff we need here to close up and to move, and then to settle. And then there's going to be a lot of interlibrary loaning between the three buildings because a sizable portion of the collection is going to go to Munson. And so there will be movement, there will be deliveries. So at this point, I can't guarantee additional staff to allow the other branches to increase their hours, but that has been what I've wanted to do all along. I just don't know yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm not seeing any other questions. So as on behalf of all of us, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you for the very responsive answers to these questions as well.
Have a great day.
And I see Mandy's hand went up as I tried to close this off, but here we go,
It's not
Mandy.
a question. I wanted to, in with the thank yous, say thank you for staying within the council's guidelines. That makes in my thinking about budget reviews, it makes my budget review of your budget much easier because you're within our guidelines. So thank you for staying within them.
Right.
Thank you for your work. Bye, you guys.
So thank you. So now we're going to swivel or pivot to capital. And this is the capital improvement plan. It's a 5-year plan. And I sent in some questions and Mandy sent in some questions, and just both Bob and I, so people, I think everyone on finance knows, both Bob and I also served on the Joint Capital Planning Committee. So I know more about all the columns in this report than I would otherwise know, and all the rows. So some of my questions are about the out years, but I think first, maybe we can focus on just FY26, or Paul, I don't know how you and Melissa want to handle this. So I had some questions about FY26, then I have a lot because the budget is balanced. For anyone who looked at it, the budget is balanced in FY26, and it is very much not balanced in the other 4 years. And it's less balanced even than when we saw it on April 23rd. FY27 is running a $4 million deficit if everything on the rows comes to pass. So how do Paul, I don't know how you want to, I had some very specific questions, as did Mandy. And do you want us to just go through those questions? Do you want to do a brief, you or Melissa want to do a brief presentation on the CIP?
I think the easiest thing is to address the questions that the counselors have, and I would rely on Melissa and Holly to sort of address them. But yeah, I think just go through the questions that most concern you would be the best way, most efficient way to do it.
Okay, so I'll just start off because some of what I was doing was comparing what we had seen. Just we gave you very little time to get yours finalized because we were still meeting late. But to shift money to be able to spend more on schools, you lowered the 10.5 for capital down to 10.65 or what, I think that's what it is. When I looked at the rows, I didn't see any of the projects change. If anything, roads were up just a little bit. So it looked like what changed is your estimate of actual debt and projected debt. And that's where you got you needed about $150,000 to lower that. And am I right that that's where
Yeah.
the adjustment, better numbers on
Yeah.
actual debt and projected debt?
Yeah, so I was, some of the projected debt numbers were in there from prior years when we started the year, and so as we get closer, Paul and I just got off a call a few hours ago with Standard & Poor's for our bond issue for in a few weeks to do a lot of the debt. So we just had better numbers, like the closer we get to issuing that. And honestly, those are my guesses. They'll probably, I estimate a higher interest rate than what we'll get, hopefully. That's typically how it works. And so, we might even have a little more room. And what we did last year or this year, and what I would advise, and I know that Holly and Jen were in agreement with this idea, is that if there are sometimes savings in the debt estimate, what we do is we become more aggressive on the pay downs of the bands that we're rolling over, and which also allows us, we pay down debt this in 2025 that was scheduled to roll for 2 or 3 years. So those big payments, because we had estimated debt that didn't come to fruition, i.e. the library, we didn't borrow for the library, and therefore there was no payment for the library in fiscal 25. So we took that money that we had estimated for 25 and spent it on another general government purpose in the debt, so that we don't have interest on, I don't know, there was something for the police, the police chiller. We had started to borrow for that, but not the full amount. So instead of paying down a small amount of that, we paid down all of it. And so the other things like that, we paid down as aggressively as possible. So to the extent that we have a few, we've overestimated our interest costs and we have savings of say $20,000 or $30,000, we'll pay down one of our debt payments an extra $20,000 or $30,000. And to the extent that that the interest rates change dramatically and I've miscalculated, we also put in sort of an extra, I think it's $123,000 of what if oops. And so if we don't need to use the what if oops, of like the interest rates didn't go from 3 to 5 overnight, which they might, I don't know, then we can take one of the projects that we're going to pay down on next year and pay an extra $100,000 down on that, so that the future years are less expensive. That's sort of the movement in that estimated debt number.
Okay, I've just, I had expected to see that you would have to lower a project spending, and you mainly re-estimated the debt. And one of the things I noticed just on this, and I don't want to stay too long on this, is that the library, which is now a live project, when I look at the debt table, you don't have a number anywhere near what we had been looking at on an annual basis for FY26. It's much lower.
Correct. So that is the interest payment on the short-term debt only, because this is not we have not borrowed the 15 million borrowed the $15 million town share yet. That is scheduled for, at this time, assuming everything keeps going as planned, for the spring of fiscal 26. So There is a small cash flow borrowing that is in there now of 2 million. That $85,000 is the interest on that debt. When we renew the whole thing, when that becomes due in a year, we'll roll that into the 15 million that we'll borrow for the town share, and we will only make principal payments, which what you showed in your estimates in prior years was that the town share had been borrowed and that we were paying principal down. And so I wanted to segregate that as one distinct number. Okay, we're going to permanently borrow for the 15 million. We're going to do it on this date, and every principal payment is towards that 15 million. And then any that's why it's less. There's no assuming of a principal, and the 15 million hasn't been borrowed yet.
Okay.
Which would be about $1 million a year, which is what you're used to seeing.
So I won't belabor this one, because it basically every number on the debt changed from what we saw, all the way throughout to 31. Yep. And we're now, instead of 10 years projection, we're at 6 years. So I liked the 10, Paul. I'm going out further, in terms of watching the big buildings come online, trying to figure out what we would have. I think 10 is. So my other quick questions, and then Mandy's hand is up. We both asked, why not show Chapter 90 somewhere? We're getting state money for roads. There's a blank on state aid in the current CIP. That has always been a line, and I understand that it's different. It's a grant, but one suggestion was show it as a footnote that there is 800 or whatever the number is, so that people understand this isn't the only money we have for roads. So I'm just not sure what the rationale is in this part of the budget, deleting a line that we have always shown as a source of funds for roads. And then all of my other questions are on, are we being tough enough about the projects in FY 27, 28, 29, and 30, to bring the how are we setting priorities? So I'm just going to stop with those so that Mandy can jump in. But can you just explain why we wouldn't somewhere show Chapter 90? I mean,
So I can answer why I didn't show it.
Yeah.
And like I've said in capital planning and several times, is that we don't show any other state grant in the capital plan. It's not part of the capital plan. It's not part of JCPC approval. And the number that has been shown there is not consistent with what we actually get. So that is the base amount. And as you know, over the last several years, the actual amount for Chapter 90 has been increased by the governor's office. And so that number goes up and down. It was an estimate put in there for the base number for Chapter 90. And then also, there are other Chapter 90, not Chapter 90 monies that aren't necessarily, that are like, they do specific projects like, I don't know, what is it? Like they do, I want to say like, they have different names. Help me out, Holly. What are the three other things that sometimes come in that are also road funding, but not specifically Chapter 90 and not maybe as flexible as Chapter 90? So it's kind of a number that, like, we could put the base number there, which is a calculation of miles in town based on a formula that the state tries to beat, or has in the past number of years that I've been doing this, tried to increase the Chapter 90 funds. And just to be consistent as to, these are not funds that no other state aid comes into this process, and nor is it part of the JCPC approval process, because it's already been designated to where that money goes. Similarly, there are monies that are supplementing other projects in the JCPC plan, in the fire department, in the planning department, et cetera. And that was my rationale.
So I wasn't questioning it on JCPC. I mean, as you said, it's money that is assumed and will be spent. I'm more, as Paul knows, as you all know, when this past fall, people saw a drop in our cash to 500,000 and focused on that and didn't focus on the fact that that wasn't the only road money. So I feel like we have to capture it somewhere. And in the capital improvement plan, putting in 4 sentences saying, in addition to our cash capital, we're getting X and Y and Z. And C, you've got it. I tried to find it in the big budget book, Paul, way back at the back, and I found something called Chapter 90 plus. But it's understating what we have available for roads is my main point. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess my response to that, Kathy, is that the JCPC can put what they want in the project. This is the town manager's report, and we chose not to put it in. So it's a judgment call. I understand what you're saying, and we just decided not to put it in this
Well, we don't have it either. I mean, it disappeared, and it was in last year's CIP and the year before, in the 6 years before that I've looked at the CIP. It's always been there. So I just point out that it makes it look like there's a drop in road spending. So I'll leave that off. Mandy, why don't you come in, because all of my others are on the out years and what we're planning to do about them. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to start with my questions with the current fiscal year, because I had a lot with the out years too, but with the Chapter 90, I just want to comment that it's not in the big budget book either, as just Kathleen said, under grants. And if Melissa's referring to it as a state grant, why isn't it listed in the grants page of the big budget book under DPW state grants? So with Kathy, I'm with her on, it should be noted somewhere in a budget. And it's always been in the CIP and it's not there anymore. Okay, but then why isn't it under the state grant section on page 200 or whatever, 256, I think, or whatever I just looked at, of the big budget that lists all the state grants. But moving off of that, 3 sort of large-ish questions. I'm going to start with the electric school buses. The CIP has 200,000 in funding for electric school bus and charging infrastructure, as well as 250 for sped vans. The elementary proposed FY26 budget has a transportation line for, quote, new vehicles budgeted at $80,000. That's on page 93 of their budget. On March 24th, the council, as you know, authorized the superintendent to enter into a contract for public transportation services nominally for the lease of electric school buses. And so right now, I am frankly extremely confused as to what of all of the money is electric school buses, why the elementary school has $80,000 for a capital purchase in their operating budget that might be the contract we just authorized the superintendent to enter into, but yet our CIP has $200,000 for the purchase of buses that we were told in March were going to be leased at a cheaper price. So can you just clear up what is going on with all of those numbers for me?
May I, Paul?
Mm.
Okay. So, I believe this was covered in JCPC, but that it is a lease, that 200,000 is a pay down on the front end of the lease. So to lower the ongoing operating costs. And so it is both capital and it is also a maintenance agreement. So it is partially operating and partially capital, because leases are first of all, leases are typically, in operating budgets, like, because they're maintenance agreements, and this includes both infrastructure building of charging stations for the buses that they are leasing and maintenance on those buses. Just like if you lease a car, like, you get a certain amount of ongoing bumper to bumper warranty. So everything except the tires are covered under that lease agreement. And so is the maintenance and infrastructure set up for the charging stations. So the 200,000 is that coupled with some other grant money they have is how they're trying to pay down the front end of that lease. Just like if you were to go lease a new car, you could choose to do a larger down payment in order to help, defer the ongoing year-to-year costs.
So Melissa, I think it's the 80,000 in the
So
elementary.
what's the
that's
80,000 in
unexplainable.
that elementary operating, and maybe that has to be dealt with on
It's-
Thursday, the
it's-
80,000 in the operating budget of the elementary school for, as they said, new vehicles.
Right, it's their lease. It's the lease. That's the
So that's
ongoing
the
lease pay.
annual lease payment, and the 200,000 is the sort of down payment on the lease?
Right.
I think correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think what they said is that if we can get some money up front from the capital, our ongoing operating costs would be lower over the future years, and that would help our budget. And that seemed to be a reasonable request.
Okay. My next question related to the buses is also related in some sense to the 450,000 budgeted for 6th grade moves. And then I'll get to, and that is last night, it was said that for the transportation, some of that is for the charging infrastructure, but that the charging infrastructure will be put on regional school property grounds. But it's my understanding that the town is the sole payer of that charging infrastructure capital improvement. But it's going to be installed at the middle school, which is regional school property. And same with the 450 in Amherst capital funding for the 6th grade move. Some of that is for improvement to the middle school building, which is not a building that the town owns. And so what kind of agreement MOU is being looked at or considered for those capital improvements that are being 100% paid for by the town of Amherst on property that the town of Amherst doesn't own, such that if that property were ever to be sold or divided because of future potential issues with region, or consolidation of that building into, the educational building into one building at the high school, the town, I believe the agreement is that the town gets 80% of whatever, essentially 80% of whatever that sale and all is, but we're putting 100% of the improvements in or something. So can you talk about who owns all of it? Who owns the improvement in the assessed value at the improvements we put into the physical building of the middle school? Who owns the charging infrastructure? How are those agreements happening?
So Paul, I'll take the busing thing
Okay.
because I've been
Yep.
involved in that project. So all of our buses are stored at they're owned by the elementary schools. And so therefore our town of Amherst property, but they are garaged or parking lot at the middle school. That is the parking lot for all of the transportation buses and or vans, and obviously the site for the charging infrastructure where it's going to be set. Because the infrastructure is leased, who owns it is the leasing company. And just so you know, it kind of like when you, we'll be able to buy it out in the end, but I don't know the end, but I do know that all of the buses are owned by the elementary school, ergo the town of Amherst, but then they have a recharge agreement for use of those buses for the region. So it's always been an inter school adjustment that they do where one owns the asset and the other pays a service for the asset. They have a service agreement between the school and the elementary school and the region for busing services. the details of that, Shannon tells me, are very complicated and I've never seen it, but it is a process that they go through every year for each part of that busing calculation. And Paul can speak to the 6th grade move.
Yeah, so typically when you lease space from a landlord, which is what the elementary school is going to do with the region, there's an allowance for leasehold improvements. But that comes out of, we're renting it out a very small amount. In the regional agreement, it talks about how much we will rent. But so if we want to rent the space, the tenant has to make the leasehold improvements to accommodate the activity they want to hold in that space. The landlord isn't going to make that improvements. Those improvements stay with the property, just as if you rented a space and you made improvements to a rented space, it stays with the property. And unless, the way we see it is, and this has happened with Amherst Media, unless you can like unplug it from the wall. We're not going to pull wires out of the wall, but if you have something that's attached to the wall, like computer equipment or something like that, that you can unplug and carry out of the building, that goes back to the elementary school district. If a year later we say we don't want that space anymore. So, and then the improvements stay with the building, and then the town of Amherst has the 80%, whatever it is, stake in that building. So the value stays, 80% of it stays with the town of Amherst if that building were to ever be, disposed of in some way. It may not have, that particular improvement may have no value to whatever the future uses of the building. But in order for us to occupy that space, the district has determined they need this amount of money to make it able to accommodate the 6th graders moving into the middle school. I hope that makes sense.
That does. I have some other questions regarding that amount of money, so I'll stick on that topic. That's not about who owns the improvements. Originally, you intended to use money from ARPA for this. And clearly you're not anymore. And you've booked the ARPA in, but for the Bang Center, you booked the ARPA into health insurance and then asked us for a thing for free cash and it'll all balance itself out. So I'm curious why you're using CIP money instead of nominally ARPA money instead of essentially free cash for this. I'm also curious what kind of I guess reports or determinations were made to figure out how much was needed, especially since there isn't an agreement with the regional school committee, as far as I know, to actually permit the 6th grade to go into the middle school at this point. So why is it essentially the question is, why is it in the CIP instead of waiting for more solid information and asking for it out of free cash like you did with banks?
So I felt an obligation to have money available to the elementary schools for the 6th grade relocation. That's something we had said earlier in the ARPA funding, that was a commitment that we had made along with other things. I wasn't confident that they would be able to actually expend the money in a timely manner under ARPA. So rather than lose that money, we put it into our health insurance and it was going to fall to free cash. But I still felt the commitment to meet the promise to the elementary school that we would provide the funding. And this is the avenue we chose. I guess we could have gone in for a free cash request. It's sort of 6 of one, half dozen the other in some ways. But I think that was the reason that this provides for that. In terms of the actual number, Melissa, did Shannon give us additional?
Yeah, so Shannon did provide, I think that they had some preliminary estimates from a previous look at this that they had done, that they had built some escalators into. And then I think that the original request was for 350, and in the JCPC, there was a discussion and about how comfortable she was with those numbers, because she was basically using really old estimates and just trying to build in an escalator, and they collectively, meaning the committee of JCPC and both Shannon and Mr. Gallo, whose first name I forget right now, but the new facilities manager or facilities director thought that they would be more comfortable with 450 as an estimate, and anything that they didn't use will go back to the town if unspent. It was just I know that's kind of how they came up with that number. Does that seem accurate, Kathy and
Yep.
Bob, about how that went? Yeah.
Yeah, that, and Mandy, they listed out some of the physical changes, including carving up a small space for sort of an administrative or clerk office, as well as doors and and painting and rehabbing it. And the other thought I had, because I had asked this of Paul when we saw this on the list, I says, is it double counting that this money will be available starting July 1 of the coming year? And to the extent we're going to certify free cash, it's not going to be till November. So this provides money to actually go out and get the estimates and get some of the work done over the summer, potentially. If the schools can focus on it, while the school is not occupied, and they could actually start to really get focused on it. I think the notion that if it comes in under, we will know about it sooner rather than later, because this is all much more time dependent on those 3-year-old appropriations that haven't spent yet. I mean, we're talking about this, it needs to be ready by in 2026 for the school opening. So because the numbers were old, Rupert did the numbers and he had specifics. The original request was 500,000 from ARPA. And so I was surprised by 350. And then they said that these were all old numbers. And old meaning had been done the year before Shannon got there. So we went up to 450.
So one follow-up question on this one, if I may. Paul, you said it really, to you, didn't make a difference between using free cash or the CIP plan money, but that 450 coming out of CIP means you can't put 450 into roads on July 1. You can't put it into other projects on July 1. You're putting it into this project. So is there a plan to essentially, when free cash is certified in November, like, are you going to point to 450,000 in potential capital expenditures and say, this is what it would have been for the school, so now we're going to put it to capital? Or like, have you thought about that too? Because it might not matter from like spending the money point of view, but it does matter for how much capital we're doing otherwise.
So our habit has been to, when we get free cash certified, we have our sort of system for allocating the funds. And then if there's additional funds available coming in for an appropriation, if you recall last year, we did ask for $1 million for roads, and the council ultimately did approve 500,000 of that. So I think that that's the way we would go about this. We would use the same process.
So Mandy, one of the things we did in the JCPC report, but it's then a question what the town manager and staff are going to propose back to us, was at our finance committee report is indicate should money become available. And we put roads up on the list. We also put, we pushed off the southeast intersection design because there isn't a choice of what we would do. So we thought, you don't put in design money till you know what you're going to do. So we had those listed. If we know what we're going to do, here's some potential. And then we pushed a huge amount of the vehicles. If you look at vehicles in FY27, almost, with a few exceptions, almost all. So we had roads, the intersection, and vehicles at the top of the list for which of we didn't have a discussion of the vehicles that weren't recommended for FY26. We didn't have a discussion of which were the most urgent. If you had to pick one, where would you go? So DPW had one they really wanted. I don't know whether it's the most urgent, but it was moved out. So we listed those as potential. And it was a street sweeper of 250,000. So we looked at some of those, but we really had no discussion. And part of what we were recommending is a vehicle policy. So how would you decide what is the most urgent of the vehicle purchases? Because we cut down on everybody's vehicle going forward. So those were the three areas we flagged, aside from middle school roof, but we flagged some as, here are some places that we know everything was moved into FY27. Yeah. So Bob, I don't know whether you want to add to that, but that was our thinking on that clearly things were bumped out. One of the big bumps, Paul, and I just want to say, last year we agreed to a bundle of 500,000 broadly called roofs for maintenance. This year, the bundle got bigger. It went to $1 million, and it was for anything, anything building related, whether it was outside of the building, the top of the building, the inside of the building. And we were told that 0 of the 500,000 appropriated last year had been spent. So there's, in theory, 1.5 million. I think one of my requests is we really need to start accounting for that. So just banking it. Stephanie's done a very nice job with sustainability fund to say, here's was 250, here's what it was spent on, when she reports up. And then she also said, here is what we're planning on spending it on in FY26. So it was and this year we didn't have that with the million, other than there's 11 or 12 million dollars of everything that we could spend it on. So $1 million is a drop in the bucket. Was kind of, rather than where will we go with it, with a suggestion, maybe town hall roof, but it's not enough for the town hall roof. So I think that's a bundling may be a good idea flexibility wise, but with it, I think comes a lot of accountability.
So if I can respond to that, if that's
Yeah.
okay, Bob.
Yeah.
So I think there's a few things. So the vehicle that the DPW had was involved in it. It's the vehicle that has the lift on it that lets us repair light fixtures. It was involved in an accident, so it couldn't be utilized. And we needed to buy a new one so we can keep doing the work, and we will get some insurance money back from it. I think there's going to be some salvaging of the actual truck itself, but the lift in the back of it, that's why that was promoted up. And I think we have been we don't have it finalized yet, but there's been a really serious, for the first time ever, analysis of all the municipal buildings, and including so we really have a much better sense of what the needs are of the buildings. And I think at this point in time, we don't have specificity on what would be a priority, but we do know the needs are dramatic. And I think you're right, Kathy, to say report back, tell us. I think we wanted to give our facilities people some flexibility in saying, hey, we're doing a roof at Atkins Reservoir. We could actually do another roof and get more bang for our buck if we also do this roof or that. I think that's the logic of it, is to give some flexibility to our experienced capital managers to make judgments on that. Their philosophy is to make sure water doesn't get into the buildings. That's job one, is to protect the buildings, and that's because water is the enemy. And then from there, all the other things happen. And there are some other things that there might be a bathroom that needs to be renovated because of handicap accessibility or something like that. But that's generally, and I think by, I'm not sure exactly what the timing is, but we will have all the reports. They're doing a building by building report, this company that's been brought in. So we'll have a much deeper analysis of each of our municipal buildings and what the investment is going to be. I think our eyes are going to be popping when we see what these numbers are, because they all need significant investment. And just as a side note, I think that's in talking with Amherst College, that's one of their big things is deferred maintenance, that they're really recognizing that as a major, something that we share, is about how we're not investing enough in our buildings to maintain them at the level we think they need to be maintained. So I think this year is one of those, we don't know, we know we need more money, but I think the approach is to account for it and say, here's how we utilized it. And I think that's the same with sustainability. We didn't know there was an option to buy batteries for our fire trucks and ambulances until well into the fiscal year. And that was money really well spent.
Can you potentially add Crocker onto your list of buildings? Because I was very,
Yeah,
I realize it's a school, but you did
Mhm.
Wildwood, and it would just be Crocker's sitting there with big needs out in the front, but doing that same assessment tool, just trying to think of, you've got a tool that, and then so I'm just,
I
it's a
can check into that.
request.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Bob.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that the approach is really for flexibility. And, we trust that the facilities guys are going to spend the money well. And also I was going to put in a plug for Crocker as well, because we haven't done that for Crocker. And I think
Mhm.
we need to know what Crocker needs, at the same level that, because it's basically the town money, even though
Yeah.
it's going through the school.
That's a good idea.
Mandy.
Yeah, I have two more questions with regard to the proposed spending for FY 26. The first one, it struck me as interesting on page 13 of your actual budget book, not the JCPC, not the CIP book, but the budget book, that you wrote that the town remains focused on core infrastructure needs, particularly the repair of roads and sidewalks, and the construction of new sidewalk connections to enhance safety, mobility, and walkability in neighborhoods across Amherst. Yet the CIP includes no additional money for sidewalks. It's zeroed out this year. So to me, the statement in the budget book that you're focused on those core needs, including new sidewalk connections and repair of sidewalks, and then the statement in the CIP basically that says, but we're not going to fund any of it, except potentially outside, we're not going to fund any of it outside of Chapter 90, because sidewalks have a 0 line versus roads that have 775, if I read it correctly.
I see $190,000 for sidewalks.
Mm.
Am I looking at the right thing?
No, it's definitely, there wasn't any 190. We got 100 for traffic calming, 50 for lights. And
Public Works sidewalks around town is 0 in FY 26. At the document I'm looking at on page 9.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
and it won't, yeah,
Why
it-
isn't it 50?
No, it's 0 for FY 26 and it's listed as 50 in the out years. So I wanted you to speak to that dichotomy, because it doesn't really ring true.
I don't have a good answer for you right now.
Okay. And then the other one was a statement you made on last night about traffic calming money, that was increased from 50 to 100,000 because there were a lot of requests. And I guess I wondered, I'm always concerned when we increase money because there's specific resident requests without having done, sort of going through the typical prioritization process, that we might prioritize the squeaky wheel instead of what isn't squeaky but might need more. And so I'd like you to talk about how DPW is going to make decisions on how to prioritize this, not ignoring the residents' request, because that's a good way to inform what needs done, but not necessarily prioritizing them over places that residents might not be speaking to. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I think Andy's probably got to talk about the proposed new committee, transportation parking, that would help facilitate that decision-making process. I mean, and I always like to think the squeaky wheel should get greased. I mean, it's squeaking, but if you have a wheel, you should grease it. But I'm not saying that is a priority, obviously. But I'm guessing what you're going to say, Andy. We're going to talk about the TSO process.
Yeah, I was just going to briefly say it because it'll be in the thing that we're going to circulate to the counselors for comment. But what we're thinking is that having a transportation and parking commission that we're going to propose to include 2 counselors, one being from this committee, either the chair or the chair's designee, as being one of the 2, and then key staff from various positions, as well as 3 residents with expertise that we will have a body that is really able to prioritize and identify what are the highest priority projects, and that will be a much sounder process than exists now, because we don't really have a good process presently. Not wanting to offend anybody by saying that, but we really think that this is one of the great improvements that can come about by establishing the commission. So that is what we're envisioning to occur, and what we want to do is also recommend to move the citizen requests having to do with public way transportation and parking issues, and move that from JCPC to the new Transportation and Parking Commission, so that you can center it all in places where their expertise. Bob is also on TSO, and I don't know if he has anything he wants to add to that.
Not specifically to that, but I did want to mention that when the issue of resident requests came up, Guilford was very clear that he has his own way of prioritizing things, and that these things wouldn't necessarily move to the front of the line. So I don't think there isn't anything in this. We just decided to increase the amount of money Guilford had to spend, because clearly traffic calming, and I've had 2 or 3 people write to me just since then. Traffic calming is a big issue in town. And so we thought it was important to address it.
Now, that's what I was going to add too, Mandy. We didn't add these. He actually said, sure, I'll take a look at it, but it's part of a bigger list, and it doesn't necessarily go to the top of the list. And I just want to make one thing on the way we describe traffic calming. In one of our pieces, and I can't remember the CIP, it talks about blinking and warning lights. I would like to add street humps, street bumps, bumps and humps. We have a preference for the blinking lights, but one of the ways, so I'll try to point it out to you, Paul, but when we describe what's in that bundle, the word traffic hump, speed bump, traffic raised position, none of that was there. It was just warning lights, blinking lights. And so a lot of these requests are to literally slow the traffic with some kind of a raised pavement. But we didn't put them at the top of the list at all. There were just a lot of them. Yeah. Bernie. You're muted.
I'm going to change gears just a little bit. I don't know if folks want to talk about traffic comments.
Can I just say one last thing, Bernie, before you do?
Sure.
So I think one of the motivations for this putting funds aside is the council was approving, considering and approving, these traffic calming measures. There was never a budget available to really implement them. So we're taking them out of existing budgets. And so this is a way to recognize that there is an interest amongst, for the town council to take these traffic calming initiatives. This puts a little bit of money aside to actually implement them.
And I guess the only thing that I would add in response to what adding to what Kathy said is, we were also assuming at TSO that if the council decides to establish the Transportation and Parking Commission, that it will not be limited to the listing that occurred in the description that was given in the capital plan. It was to anything that the commission itself would determine is appropriate expenditure of those funds to achieve the goal of traffic calming.
Okay, so Bernie, ready to switch.
Okay, I'll just throw in paint, which is also a great cheap way to do traffic calming. So if we have fog lines that are a little further away from the curbs and the like, makes the road seem smaller and will help. My confusion with the capital budget is one capital budget question, one comment. The fire department public safety radio system replacement, We will recall that last year that created some, because it was $900,000. We got some questioning about that. It's back in the budget, word for word, but at 1.1 million. So my question is, what happened to the communications system?
So the communication system was split last year. So it was originally 900,000 and 900,000. So this is the second year of that
Okay.
project. And then what we learned from the fire, well, from the public safety officials, you know, because this is, although it comes in under fire, it is a dispatch, police, and fire system, so that all of the public safety radio systems can talk to each other. And they said that unfortunately the cost of implementing it has gone up. And I know that they have gone out to bid on the first half of the system recently, and I'm not sure if that has come back in, but I know that there were some
All right, so this
issues.
is a continuation from the previous
Yeah,
appropriation.
so it's actually
All
$2
right.
million. So I just want to put it out there that it's not only is it not 900,000, it's 2 million.
$2 million, and I will add that it's $2 million if we get our bids up before the tariffs kick in.
Correct.
Because then it can be much more expensive. I just want to make a comment about the allegation that certain departments are padding their operating budgets with capital money. Andy will recall from our previous service on the Finance Committee, earlier iteration of the Finance Committee, and I sure hope that the folks who are on the served in the Capital Improvements Committee will make the point that requests are pretty carefully rogued off, and that stuff that should be in operating budgets are in operating budgets, and that that's a source that's been an ongoing source of concern that we don't, and some tension, because as we tightened up the definitions of what's capital and looked at it, it put some additional pressure on the operating budgets themselves. So I just want to make that point to assure folks that the staff and the Finance Committee understands the difference between capital item and padding your operating budget.
So Andy, I think your hand is up first on my screen, so it's Andy, Bob, and Mandy.
The question I was going to ask is something that I had a brief conversation with Kathy about by email, and it is the improvements to Southeast Street that were started as a discussion because of the anticipation of increased traffic going with the new elementary school building at the Fort River site. It now is proposing that the design be in FY27 and that the construction be in FY28. And I was curious what the thinking was about that, because that certainly then pushes it back to after the school is open, which is actually a discussion that TSO has had. But I was wondering what the thinking was as far as constructing the CIP, how that came about, and what is the intention, because I think we need to coordinate the processes among the committees.
I can speak to it, Andy, but just, and we did rank that high if certified cash is available at the end of this current calendar year. The concern was putting design money in. The design money might be spent without an agreement on what the design should be. That you could really spend the money quickly, and that since we weren't at a point of agreeing on what should happen there. Guilford originally asked for 500,000 for that. He said the lowest he could go was 260. But he didn't give what that 260 would buy. And when he was asked, suppose where we want to go is some better traffic lights, including a bus controlled traffic light, entrance and exit, and just traffic system lights on both. How much design money would that cost? And he said, the lowest I will go is 260 was the answer. I mean, it wasn't what about if we're doing a roundabout and we're doing the lowest I'll go, so the worry was the money will get spent unless we are sure about what we're designing to, that it would be a repeat of getting back what we just got on the 4 traffic circles, which weren't met with a hurrah. And the estimate for the costs of whatever was 6 million. And I looked at the what we're spending on the roundabout down at University Drive or what we spend on Pomeroy. And for a roundabout, it's more in the 1.5 million. So that number didn't seem to make any sense either, but we didn't focus a lot on the 6, like, could it be lower? We mainly moved the design piece off. So I would rank it very high, Paul, if we have certified cash and if there's some agreement on what should happen there. So there is, and then the only other point is it may all disappear, but the state has money called intersections near schools where they will put in grants up to $500,000. So if we knew what we wanted to do, we potentially are in line for a grant, but we would have to apply for it. So we pushed it off because of the abstractness of what we were hearing, not because we thought if there was agreement on what we wanted to do, yes, go ahead and design it. So the design costs seemed to be, no matter what you wanted, it was going to cost this much money, which didn't seem to make sense. So
the TSO was told that we needed to spend some money with consultants in order to have DPW draw plans to even see what was feasible. Because what we were asking for is some analysis and presentation by DPW, just to give us the ability to compare those 2 options that you described. And the response was, we don't have the capacity to do that without getting some assistance. So I'm not sure how this whole calendaring works out then.
Well, he didn't say you were down to 2. He did talk about doing a mock-up and blocking and a matched major design. And I just worry that the money gets spent really fast if you're not moving toward an agreed on solution. And I will say, I wasn't the only one that reacted this way to it. And the other thing I think I'm reacting to is up here in North Amherst, where the intersection, there was extra work done on it that didn't match what people thought we were applying for. It didn't get funded, but there was a lot of design or early speccing out work. So I think getting clearer on what direction, as you know, I'm not on TSO, so that it was the haziness of the answer, and it didn't seem like there was a focused use of that money that led us to say we weren't ready yet to spend it, and if we waited, so it may not have been the best decision, but that was where we ended up. Bob, you might want to speak to it too.
Yeah, the other thing Guilford said was, if we're pushing this to FY26, we wouldn't have the road prepared by the time the school opens. So in some respects, it's a bit of a moot issue, because we're not going to have whatever it is we want to do won't be ready for September 2026, when the school kids are going into the school. So that's what Guilford said. So I mean, there was, I think to me, we really have a chicken and egg situation. We need either the council or TSO or somebody has to sit down and decide what are the options we want DPW to look at. And then we need to move forward with that, because right now, I don't know, I'm not even sure what options we have to look at. The other thing I wanted to mention about the police and fire system is the first year's money really goes to the base stations, which are the sort of the broadcast stations. And then this year's money goes to units that are mobile units that are going to be in the cruisers and in the fire trucks, and then carried by individual police officers and firefighters. So it's really divided in, it's one big project, but it is divided up into those pieces. So anyway.
Mandy?
Yeah, I'm gonna flip grounds to some of my other questions, but I'm gonna basically combine them. A lot of them had to do with the CIP for the 5-year plan out years is much worse than it's been in the last couple of years. It's not anywhere close to balanced in FY25 and 24 and all. We've worked really hard to get it close to balance. And much of that lack of balance, this is why there were multiple questions, because I write the questions as I go through and then never combine them, but seems to result from dropping from the CIP a pending list and moving nearly all of the projects that were on that pending list in FY25 or FY24 into the actual CIP for the 5 years. And that pending list included things like the Cracker Farm Playground, police body cameras, Puffer's Pond dredging. Those were ones that the pending list said they'd be funded through grants or other sources when funds are available. Puffer's parking lots and beach improvements, War Memorial Playgrounds were projects that require more development and analysis, but they've been moved into the 5-year plan, creating this wildly out of balance 5-year plan. So can you speak to why they were dropped, why the whole pending list was dropped, number one, why many of the projects were moved into the 5-year plan, including projects that said they needed more development and analysis, or projects that there might be grants and would only be done with grants, instead of keeping them in a pending list? Are we giving up on the grants? Have we done the development and analysis for like the parking lot and trail improvements and stuff so that they are logically now in the 5-year plan? Please talk to the thinking around all of that.
Do you want to start, Paul, or do you want me to?
You can.
Okay, so all of those items were continue to be requested by the departments. So they are pending. They aren't pending. They are real legitimate requests. And that doesn't mean that they've given up on the idea of getting grant money. But as we experienced with Sean's project for the disaster recovery, he didn't get the grant. He'd hoped that he would, and he didn't. So instead of removing it completely, we ended up funding a smaller amount this year for the most urgent need, and it is put into the subsequent year, not as pending, but as that we're going to apply for the grant next year and hopefully we'll get it. And if we do, then it will come out of the capital plan, because it doesn't, these grant funds don't show in the capital plan. And so, but I also didn't want it to come back the way that other things have come back, where they're like, well, why is this the first we're hearing about that? They're like ongoing needs, they're new needs, they come into the plan. So you can put things in a pending list, but to me, that's just like, oh, well, I wanted to force it to balance, and doesn't that look pretty? And it's not based in reality. So that's my logic on it, and you can disagree with it, but that's sort of where I went with that. And then, so I would say that all of the departments are acutely aware that funding is unavailable and that we are in a deficit for these capital items, but they wanted their needs to be reflected. And so that's how we reflect that. And then every year we need to make choices based on their priority, while they continue to seek other ways to fund those projects. And many of our projects, as you know, come through that are partially funded by CPA and partially funded through the CPI project, and we don't know the balance of that. And some of our grants, especially around parks, have matching requirements. So you have to, the total amount of the project needs to show up in the CIP, because if you ever have gotten a park grant, I believe Amherst has done several, but park grants require the town to take on the full cost of the project as far as an appropriation, which is typically done in a borrowing, but then ultimately you only borrow for the amount that is the town match. So I think that was my logic. I know that there is disagreement on this committee about why it was done that way, but that was my thought process when putting the work together.
Well, no, I want to speak to this too. So
Yeah, so I think the question is, okay, this is a planning document. It's not it's a planning document. It's a capital improvement planning document that says, what are our needs? How are we going to place them on the out years? Are we capturing all of the needs? And are we making decisions along the way? Like, what are the priorities? And I guess it's, we've done it two different ways. And I think the whole point of this is to communicate to the council and to the public what are our needs. And I think it's an open conversation, like, which is a better way to present it? Is it better to put them on, log them in and show that we don't have enough money to do everything we want? Or is it better to balance out those out years and say we have this wish list also? And, I think we've done it both ways, and I just sort of welcome your thoughts on what's the best way to communicate. This is a communication document. Like, what's the best way to communicate what we want to say on this, I guess, is my question.
So, Anne, did you want to speak to, because this was a half a discussion on JCPC, but
Yeah.
we didn't really get into it. Anne, did you want to speak to it? And
Yeah,
then I would
The
like to.
only thing that I want to add to the comments that were just made by Melissa and Paul is that if a playground shows on the list that people are really interested in for FY27, given the nature of who our constituents are, there are going to be some advocates of that playground who will have seen the CIP, have looked for it, have gotten excited, and will be very disappointed, will be coming back complaining to whoever is involved in town government in FY27 that playground that was promised for the year was not developed. Whether it's dredging Puffer's Pond or playgrounds or trails or anything that people are interested in, you have to be prepared for the complaints that are going to come when that year happens and it doesn't, in the construction that was proposed, the capital investment that was proposed is not made.
So, Paul, you said, it may be a preference or what I think of as a planning, but putting it on an action list and saying everything on the FY27, 28, 29 is an urgent issue, I think is the mistake, is what we're putting to that Dave Zomack, when talking about puffers, the puffers on the list, if you add it up, is more than $5 million. And a piece of that feels really urgent. You want to make sure the dam doesn't break and that the dike holds. And then we talked about the water quality, and it's not clear that dredging will solve the problem. They think it's an upstream. So some of these others seemed, we would like to do it as opposed to urgent. So he talked about, I was put in a box before by Sean McMahon. The box was called if money becomes available, these are the top things we'd like to put back on the agenda. And so what Andy just said, I think that's a better way of presenting the choices we're going to have to make than showing a 5-year plan where only 1 year is balanced and the other years are broadly out. It looks like we didn't make decisions. And then my other point on this is we've got these buildings coming in, and we've been told in a separate session that there's only going to be so much money for new projects if the buildings start coming in. So the implication of that, there's only so much money. So we have to start prioritizing. So I think a planning document needs to say, these are important, but they're not at the same level of urgency, and that's why they're not on the list right now. It's not that we don't know about them, and that it writes your plan a little bit differently. You know, it has a section that talks about that rather than just dismisses them. So that's why when I actually was recommending that make some choices on puffers and pick the one that is urgent and leave it on the list, and then talk about the others if we can move forward on it, because puffers is clearly a treasured resource. But seeing it on the list, people are going to think we're going to fix puffers. And we didn't even have any assurances that spending all that money, the water quality would be okay. So it was like, whoa, that's a lot of money to fix a beach, put in a bathroom, you know, et cetera. So that's just I realize it's a judgment call, but I think getting nearer to balance. So that was just one comment I made, and it looks like fire station has been moved off a bit. I think we in finance and we in the council need to have a conversation about, do we move some of the money out of the capital stabilization fund to make DPW real, you know, to make sure we can pay for it. And that would show a different capital plan, because it would show some money coming in from a stabilization fund as a source, but it would be matched with a use, you know. So just trying to think of, if that's part of the thinking now, starting to talk about it would be a good idea. I'll stop on that, but that was just my reaction to urgent versus priority, or urgent versus very urgent versus if money becomes available, as a good way of ranking things. Mandy.
Yeah, I agree with Kathy. I thank you, Paul, for sort of which way is the best way, right? But I agree with Kathy and frankly what Andy said. The minute it shows up on those 5 years in those charts starting on page 8, people think it's going to happen, even though page 7 shows that clearly not all of it can happen. But they get invested in it then, right? Which is, I think, why in previous JCPCs, we pushed to have that chart more balanced, because people do look at it and say, oh, the playground is there or dredging's there, without realizing $3 million has to come off of this and all. So I really appreciated the pending list, and maybe there's a different way to do it. Maybe there's a color. I think JCPC, there used to be a color coding of the chart that starts on page 8, you know, that had like various colors of what's been moved from various years, which got very confusing. But maybe there's a way to create sort of 2 charts that are equivalent to page 8. One that's got, here's what our plan as of now is. Obviously that will change, and maybe we need a little bit more wording about, you know, presentation of what these charts are. This is what we think the next 5 years of projects will be that fits into our budget. And then there's a similar chart after that that says, and here's the next level of priority if more money comes, or if we get grants for some of the stuff in. Because what I heard from Melissa was, well, we didn't get the disaster recovery grant, and so we put it in to fund it here because it's that important. Is Crocker Farms Playground or is the War Memorial Playground that important that if we don't get the grant, we're going to do it out of our CIP money? Or really is it we're waiting for that grant, right? And that's, we need to find a way to clearly put that information into the CIP, because people look at this project and say, oh, we're getting a new roof and we're getting this and we're getting puffers dredged and trail improvements and a parking lot. And no, we're not getting it all. And so how do we communicate what of, not just those are some of the big ones. So those are some of the ones that if you pull out would help the project's balance, but maybe they're not the ones you pull out. Maybe you start pulling out all of the cars and say, you know, we're not going to do, when I get to vehicles here, $2.8 million worth of vehicles next year. And we're going to start pulling them out, or, you know, we're going to rethink that, or we're going to rethink the Cherry Hill Golf Course EV charging that showed up this year. I'm happy that there's an EV charging and cart shelter in the plan, but is that our highest priority? It just showed up, and yes, we need to track it because we want to do it, but where in the list should it be? When we have money, or is that going to, when we get to FY28 and if it's still there, is that taking precedent over some other $175,000 project? Has it bumped up and all? So I would go with balance the budget, keep either a pending list or some other thing that tracks the projects. I agree, we should track what the departments need. It's a good way to show the town how tight all of our funding mechanisms are and all of the choices we are making. So I don't want to lose that visual and that transparency, but we should be thinking about in 5 years when we only have 3 million in cash capital, what right now are that 3 million most important projects? And let's put them into this 5-year plan and move everything else off into pending. Or some
Okay.
other way of listing it.
Mhm.
Bernie,
You almost need two lists.
Mhm.
One is, this is what we're going to pay for out of cash at hand, free cash, whatever, or through borrowing the town's going to pay for. And this is what we hope to do with other people's money. Whether it's, whether it's a grant or a reserve fund or something else. So that people can more easily discriminate between how we're going to pay for all this stuff. That seems to me to be a problem overall, and we're certainly not going to solve it in this discussion this afternoon, because people seem to think that there's a budget god somewhere that will just throw money down on us when we put something on paper, and we go through the struggle every year. But I really do think I would like to see a comprehensive list of what the town needs. But that may be, again, the best way to do that, maybe divvy it up. This is what we need, and this is important enough that we're going to pay for it out of pocket. We're going to pay for it out of available funds. This is what a wish list that we're going to try to get grants for, and then this is, blue sky thinking. If we had all the money in the world, we'd do this stuff. It's a lot more work, but it does make it easier to pull apart the affordable projects versus the wish list versus this would be nice if we had it kind of things.
So if I'm hearing the counselors right, what I'm hearing is several counselors saying is that we would like to have a 5-year plan that looks doable. We don't want to lose the list of all the things that we have to do or we would like to do to make our town the town we want. And that would go into a different list, but it could be prioritized, it could be not. And then sort of identify how much cash capital we have to work with, and sort of say, and what Bernie's saying, try to allocate those funds as best we can. So, I think there's two different approaches. One is just as a needs budget versus what's available to us. So, we'll talk that over with our staff and talk through this, what the options are.
I think you captured, Paul, and you said early on it's a communication document.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to communicate.
Yeah, and I think Andy's right that people latch on to a number in year 3 of the project. They say, we're going to get our new playground, whatever it is. It could be a truck or whatever. In year 3, we're counting on it. Even though when you go to the bottom line, that there's going to be $1 million in cuts in that year. So.
Yeah, and fortunately, you're not giving us operating budgets that are $4 million in deficit 2 years out. So I mean, it's a similar way of thinking that we're trying to plan our capital in a way that we think we can afford it, and then we know what else we'd like to do, and how you communicate that it's not that we were ignoring these other pieces.
Okay, I hear you on that.
So I also do want to say I realize the intense stress that this has all been produced under, in terms of both, the getting JCPC budget and schools all running on the same track. That decision.
Yeah, can I just say, I mean, our team has been working
It's been
weekends,
amazing. It's just been totally amazing what you've accomplished.
and just made a knock 'em out presentation this morning with the Standard & Poor's. So it's just, these folks have been working their butts off. So I just wanted to recognize that.
No, so this is not it's constructive advice is the way I
Mhm.
would put
I hear
it,
you on
rather
that.
than, yeah, no, not anything else other than, the pretty pictures. I think if anything, we've gone overboard on the pretty pictures and stuff, and tried to say, what's the message we're trying to get across here, and try to think about it.
Mhm.
So Andy.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to follow up on what Paul said. Thank Paul, thank Melissa, Holly, Kathy. I want to thank you and Bob for serving on JCPC. The amount of work that has gone into thinking through what our capital needs are and how we can go about organizing and funding them is just a tremendous chore, having been on JCPC many years myself. I've lived them too, but you guys just did a fantastic job this year, and we're kind of now getting a little bit lost into the amount of information and detail that you provided for us, but we wouldn't have had this conversation if you hadn't provided it to us. So thank you, thank you.
Well, and Paul, just, however you thank all the staff, we had amazingly robust conversations, and I think quite honest conversations during JCPC, on including a challenge on, can't you drive your police car more than 100,000 miles? Why does it collapse? But now I've been looking at, and it looks like Ford Explorers are often collapsing, like it's the particular vehicle that may be a problem, but who knows whether there are other options. But the reception to those questions was so cordial and are willing to discuss rather than say, well, wait a minute, what do you know? It was fantastic. And Melissa facilitating them, making sure people knew we were raising the question and got them back into a meeting, various groups. That was terrific also. So big thanks to your staff.
Great, thank you.
And I have 3:58. So if we have a motion to adjourn, we could end on time. I'll make a motion to adjourn. Why don't I do that?
I'll second.
Tom seconded, and I will do a quick vote. Bob?
Aye.
Kathy say yes. Mandy?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Tom? Bernie?
Of course.
And Alicia left early, as she said she would. So we are adjourned, and next Thursday is schools. So anyone who hasn't looked at schools, and there's a set of questions that has been sent to the school. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your Tuesday. And thank you, staff, very much. We are adjourned.